Mexican Marines storm a safe house, but the gunmen are waiting. Gunfire erupts, bullets shred the air. Sicarios are dead before they hit the floor. Beneath them, through a secret tunnel, a man runs, boots splashing in cold sewer water. His reign as the world's most feared drug lord is coming to an end. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we'll show how El Chapo was caught. October 2nd, 2015. Less than 3 months had passed since El Chapo shocked the world by escaping a maximum security prison for the second time. Mexico was humiliated, U.S. agencies were furious, and El Chapo, he vanished. That is, until 2 Hollywood actors handed U.S. intelligence a fresh lead. Guzman's ego was at an all-time high. Flush with power and myth, he was convinced his story deserved the big screen. From a poor farmer's son to the feared boss of the Sinaloa cartel, it was a rags-to-riches story tainted with blood. He bragged to lawyers and confidants about hiring top directors and movie stars to bring his legend to life. And the focus of his obsession? Kate del Castillo, the Mexican telenovela star who made it big in Hollywood. Of course, her looks would appeal to a womanizer like Guzman, but it was her portrayals of drug world figures like himself that really grabbed his attention. In any case, Guzman seemed to trust her and wanted to meet. Del Castillo was the only one who could tell his story. The two began trading messages through their lawyers. After months of encrypted messages, Guzman invited Del Castillo and the actor Sean Penn, who was also interested in the drug lord's life, to his mountain hideout deep in cartel territory. The actors and El Chapo went to great lengths to stay hidden, but by intelligence standards, their efforts were amateur at best. U.S. federal agents were stunned that the world's most wanted man would risk everything and arrange a meeting with 2 Hollywood stars. And sure enough, the DEA and intelligence agencies intercepted their communications, using the actors to pinpoint El Chapo's location. October 6th. 4 days after the meeting, an elite Mexican Navy team trained by the CIA and U.S. military stormed El Chapo's ranch in the Sierra Madre Mountains. A coordinated ground and air assault. It looked like the perfect trap. In seconds, the compound is a storm of gunfire and shouted commands. But in the chaos, El Chapo fled through an overgrown gully, disappearing before they could close the net. Overhead, a military helicopter tried to track him through the thick jungle canopy. 2 women and a young girl trailed in his wake. Then, in a moment of sheer desperation, the drug lord used the child as a human shield while he forced his way through the undergrowth. Fearing collateral damage, the commandos called off the hunt. Guzman had escaped. Again. But this time, by the skin of his teeth. He knew he had to be clever, more careful. U.S. agencies were penetrating deeper and deeper into his network. They were mapping out cartel organizational structures, travel routes, shadowing small-time players to snare the bigger ones. Even his most loyal soldiers weren't safe. Their phones were tapped, messages were hacked, every conversation relayed straight back to the people hunting him. El Chapo had spent decades cultivating a network, clients, fixers, politicians, anyone that he could bribe or break. His influence reached every level of society. Bribes opened doors, threats kept them open, anyone who refused suffered, and so did their families. Rival cartels were wiped out one by one, further strengthening his control over the Mexican drug trade. Crowds treated him like a legend. Songs were written about him. His poor upbringing, daring prison escapes, and willingness to mix with the ordinary people made him a Robin Hood figure, and it was a role Guzman loved playing. But now that system was collapsing. His escape from Altiplano Federal Maximum Security Penitentiary had humiliated the Mexican government, and now they were under immense pressure to put him away permanently. The manhunt exploded in size. At the same time, rival syndicates started slicing away Sinaloa territory piece by piece. There were no real safe zones left. El Chapo's enemies were tightening the circle. Early December 2015. The coastal city of Los Mochis sat 3 hours north of Culiacan, the Sinaloa capital and El Chapo's stronghold. It was the last place anyone expected him to hide. It was Beltran Leyva cartel turf. Down south, he had protection. Up here, he was vulnerable and outnumbered. For almost a year, the residents in the upmarket Las Palmas neighborhood had watched workmen descend on a 2-story house. The place had been purchased by an unknown buyer and left empty. Olive trees were planted on the sidewalk to shield the front. Cameras went up on every corner. The walls grew taller. Metal gates locked the entrances, and blackout curtains shut out the world. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress. And while all this was going on, U.S. federal agents and Mexican Marines got 2 crucial pieces of intelligence. Intercepted Sinaloa cartel messages pinpointed to an impending visit to Los Mochis by grandma and aunt, code names used by El Chapo himself and his loyal lieutenant, Orso Ivan Gastelum Cruz. better known as Cholo Ivan. The Americans and their Mexican counterparts started zeroing in on potential hideouts across Los Mochis. The renovated house in Las Palmas stood out, and they moved fast to put the neighborhood under surveillance. Besides the rival cartel threat, Los Mochis raised eyebrows for another reason. Just 2 blocks away was the mansion of the Sinaloa governor's mother, surrounded by cops, checkpoints, and security teams. It was a neighborhood under constant watch, exactly the kind of place El Chapo usually avoided. Later, investigators learned that Gastelum had urged his boss not to go there, and it was a warning that would prove absolutely right. Early January 2016, U.S. federal agencies had spent months working with the Mexican Navy team, waiting for the perfect window to move on Guzman. Their focus narrowed to the house in Los Mochis, watching for any sign that would confirm he was inside and give the green light for a raid. Neighbors reported seeing men carrying high-caliber military-grade weapons close to the house, something you would expect to see in lower middle-class neighborhoods. The house was alive with activity. Someone was coming, someone important. Later, surveillance footage showed an armored vehicle moving down the block. It slowed, turned sharply, and disappeared into the carport. Navy officers were ready to launch the capture operation, but they had to be absolutely sure that El Chapo was in the house. One wrong move, one premature call, could spook his men and jeopardize months of work. If they lost the element of surprise, they would either tip off the drug lord and send him underground again, or spark a brutal firefight with heavy casualties. The operation had to be quick, surgical, and completely unexpected. January 8th, the Special Forces unit received a second piece of critical intel. It was small, but decisive. Just after midnight, a taqueria received an order for 100 tacos, enough to feed a small army. Minutes later, a white armored van, the same type El Chapo favored, rolled into the parking lot. Men exited, weapons slung over their shoulders, and the Special Forces knew they had their moment. An informant made a call. The news moved up the intelligence chain until it reached the Mexican Navy strike team. Now they were certain that Guzman, or at least his second-in-command, were inside the safe house. 3 a.m. The Navy squad began to move into position. The streets were still, drones hummed far overhead, scanning for movement and heat signatures below. Armored cars prowled quietly through the suburbs, idling at corners, cutting off escape routes. Down the street, U.S. Delta Force operators huddled in a van with Mexican Navy officers, rehearsing tactical maneuvers. U.S. Marshals sat in a vehicle nearby. CIA and DEA agents loitered in the vicinity. The Americans wouldn't take part directly in the raid. Instead, they were guiding, advising, and monitoring every move as the Mexican Special Forces prepared to strike. Everything they had done had led to this. 4:30 a.m. 17 Mexican Marines surged toward the entrance of the safe house, running low to the ground and hugging the exterior walls of neighboring homes to avoid detection. They stopped under the olive branches in front of the gate. Inside, the house was deathly silent. No noise. Apart from a solitary white patio light, the house was enveloped in darkness, its occupants hidden by the blackout drapes. 4:40 a.m. The Marines got the order to breach. A handheld battering ram slammed into the front gate, metal buckling under the impact. The whole operation played out through a helmet-mounted GoPro, recording everything in real time. The soldiers rushed into the patio space, shouting orders as they moved. Inside the compound, cartel foot soldiers instantly opened fire, unleashing a volley before the Marines even reached the doorway. Inside, nearly a dozen gunmen were waiting in the shadows. The Marine team leader was hit immediately and staggered back. The Navy forces pulled out of the kill zone, crouching outside of the open doorway and dragging the wounded man beneath the window grating for cover. Gunfire cracked back and forth through the doorway as Marines and cartel gunmen traded bursts. A Navy commando fired off shots through the window. Then came a flashbang and a grenade. The explosion rocked the entire house, with smoke and debris shooting out of the doorway and window in a violent shockwave. Silence. The Marines regrouped before pouring into the open hallway and living room space. The lights came on as they entered. Peering through the haze of dust and smoke, they spotted a dead cartel member curled up in the corner. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, blackened and torn. Plaster littered the floor. In the kitchen, the fridge stood half open, broken eggs and crushed takeout boxes scattered across the floor. The Marines spread out through the first floor, the barrel-mounted flashlights sweeping through the rooms. 4 guards in the master bedroom instantly surrendered, throwing down their guns. Other commandos moved to the narrow staircase at the back of the hall, where several cartel guards had taken defensive positions on the second-floor landing. One gunman raised a loaded RPG at the Marines, but before his finger could squeeze the trigger, he was dropped by a burst of gunfire. The Marines stormed up the stairs to the second floor, where the hall lounge had also been torn apart by the firefight. 2 more cartel fighters quickly gave up their weapons. The Marines also found 2 women huddled on the bathroom floor. The Marines pushed the last cartel fighters up onto the roof terrace. Overhead, helicopter searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the entire block. Cartel gunmen leapt to nearby roofs, firing wildly only to be cut down in a hail of bullets. 2 others tried to hold their positions at the edge of the terrace, but were dispatched almost immediately. Blood pooled on the tiles. The Marines completed 1 more sweep of the house. The building was secure, and the surviving gunmen were in custody. But there was no sign of El Chapo's lieutenant or the cartel boss himself. 5:30 a.m. While the Navy forces flipped mattresses and tore through cabinets searching for any trace of the drug lord, Guzman and Gastelum crouched in a sewer tunnel several blocks away. They had fled the house at the first sign of the assault. Now they had at least a 20-minute lead on the assault team. Back in the house, the Navy team began to look for escape routes. They knew the Kingpin wouldn't have considered his safe house fully equipped without a secret room or exit route. They thumped on the walls and moved furniture, searching for a concealed door or a telltale hollow sound in the plaster. Then their focus shifts to a walk-in closet. Behind one of the full-length mirrors was a steel door, operated by a trick handle hidden in one of the light fixtures. Through the door, a stairway descended several feet to a subterranean passage. It was a signature El Chapo move, a reinforced escape tunnel fitted with lighting and ventilation. The same kind of tunnel the Sinaloa cartel had used to help Guzman bust out from maximum security prison and to move drugs across the US-Mexico border. The Marines dropped into the tunnel after El Chapo and Gastelum. The passage fed into the city's sewer network, a suffocating maze of low ceilings, twisting pipes, and rising filthy water. And somewhere in the darkness was El Chapo. 6:30 a.m. The Navy team was more than 1,600 feet down the dank corridor when they realized it was raining. The water was rising, and the labyrinth of sewer lines stretched far in every direction. Going forward would mean losing precious time. Instead, they backtracked to the house to strategize. Helicopters hovered over the streets of Las Palmas, sweeping the neighborhood for any sign that Guzman or Gastelum had surfaced and were attempting to slip out into the night. After 20 minutes of rain, the Navy team started to think the fugitives may have drowned in the sewer. Troops fanned out through the neighborhood, lifting manhole covers and dropping into the tunnels below, searching for any signs of the fugitives, dead or alive. 7:30 a.m. The winter sun began to rise over Las Palmas. Residents were waking up to a war zone. They spilled from their homes to gawk at the operation's aftermath. Streets were cordoned off. Marines stood guard at the doorway of the safe house, while a forensics team scoured the room and gathered samples. Officers began cataloging the weapons captured in the assault: 50 caliber rifles, the loaded RPG, gem-encrusted handguns, and 2 armored cars. The commandos were growing frustrated. They were desperate for a lead. They widened the search radius out from Las Palmas, combing the neighborhood for any trace of El Chapo, but it started to look futile. Guzman could have been anywhere by this stage. Months of surveillance, the satellites, the drones, intercepted calls, hacked messages, all had led to this night, and yet public enemy number 1 seemed to have vanished again. 8:30 a.m. Guzman and Gastelum were soaked, stiff, and coated in mud and sewage. Since the early morning, they had been hiding out in a section of sewer about a mile from the safe house. They had been standing in foul water for hours, and it was still rising. They knew they could stay here. Overhead, they heard the faint rumble of traffic. The sun had been up for more than an hour. The city was awake. 8:55 a.m. A gas station camera captured grainy footage of 2 men, white undershirts stained with mud and grime, climbing out of a manhole. El Chapo and Gastelum had ditched their heavy weapons in the sewer, but still had firepower. They crossed the street brandishing handguns and forced the driver of a slow-moving Volkswagen Jetta out of the car. It wasn't exactly an ideal getaway car, as they would soon discover. The transmission slipped. The engine stalled, and it died seconds later. Guzman and Gastelum ditched it by an auto shop. They immediately hijacked a red Ford Focus at a traffic light. The driver, a young mother, pulled her 5-year-old daughter from the car and ran from the armed fugitives. Aware of the heightened police presence, Gastelum pulled out slowly into traffic. He followed the speed limit and even stopped at a red light for 2 minutes. Rather than heading south to Culiacan or east into the mountains, both safe ground for El Chapo, the men drove north on Highway 15 straight out of Los Mochis. Maybe they'd hoped to slip out of the state and go dark. In a way, it made sense, since escaping from Altiplano, Guzman had been hunted down twice already. As the outskirts of Los Mochis gave way to farmland, Guzman felt a familiar thrill of having made it. He had done it again. He had slipped the net, outsmarted the authorities, embarrassed everyone chasing him. That feeling of being untouchable was something he craved, or so he thought. The federal police received 2 alerts of successive carjackings in Los Mochis. Like every other branch of Mexican law enforcement, they were unaware of the target of the morning raid, or the connection between the events. All units were alerted to a stolen red Ford Focus leaving the city. About 12 miles outside of Los Mochis, the Ford came to a halt at the side of a highway. Moments later, a federal police cruiser pulled in behind them to check out the stolen vehicle without realizing who was inside, and this would work to their advantage. El Chapo attempted to bribe his way out of police custody, but it fell on deaf ears. The standard offer of a reward and protection. And when that didn't work, El Chapo calmly said, "You are all going to die." The arrest hit law enforcement channels immediately. The Navy called the officers within minutes, telling them to move the suspects to a nearby hotel and hold tight for reinforcements. They were worried about a cartel rescue attempt, and they weren't going to lose their targets. Not again. 11 a.m. Flanked by masked troopers, El Chapo was taken under heavy escort to the airport and then flown to Mexico City, where he was transferred straight back into federal custody. 11:19 a.m. President Enrique Peña Nieto announced on Twitter, "We have him." A year later, Mexico extradited the cartel boss to the United States to stand trial for his crimes. Decades of flooding American cities with drugs and drug-fueled gang violence. In 2019, Joaquin Guzman Loera was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. This time in a prison no one breaks out of. Now watch all the insane ways El Chapo has escaped prison to see how he kept slipping through the cracks. Or click on this video instead.